Hello everyone, I'm Salt. In the previous video I mentioned wanting to do a few workbook walkthroughs for some of the classes I've been taking to show a bit of what I've been doing over the course of this year, art and design wise. Since this is my first workbook walkthrough and I'm still working on finding a good setup with my current desk and camera, it's literally just my phone, a selfie stick and a rock to hold things in place, I figured it would be best to start off with one of the lighter subjects I worked on. Lighter as in there was less stuff to show in the end, to show you all what it was like and how I came up with my final product in that class. And so here's my workbook for 2018 Introduction to Contemporary Sculpture. Going into this class, I really wasn't sure what to expect. I had already taken a few contemporary art classes before, so I knew it was going to be a bit outside the box in terms of what kind of thinking processes were going to be involved, which I was really looking forward to, but also kind of worried about since no two contemporary art classes are going to be the same, and it's difficult sometimes to gauge exactly what's expected of you, especially since I'm not in an arts degree, and looking from the outside in on the art world can be really confusing to say the least. Hopefully this workbook walkthrough will help break down and analyze a bit of what's going on for anyone who's interested in the fine arts, or even anyone who took one look at fine arts and just went, wait, what? So the very first week of the course consisted of being presented with the task of finding a game with a three-dimensional game piece. We were then supposed to document this piece, create a few sketches of it, and take notes on what it was made of, possibly even how it was made. I chose the game of chess, which I was worried was a bit of a stereotypical game to pick, but oddly only about 3 other people actually picked chess, and I only picked the king piece, so that worked out in the end. But just to be extra sure, I went and chose the king piece from a hand-carved chess set from Mexico. Very specifically, that particular chess set, just so I wouldn't be docked for creativity points or something. I sketched out on paper a few times from different angles and even tried to mimic the color with pens on soaked paper, which looks great until it dries and looks like a mess, by the way. Since I was still incredibly worried about chess being too popular, I also made a backup set of sketches of a little plastic turtle from a children's Mancala game. Turtle ended up being unnecessary in the end, but it was still cute. And that was week 1. Finding a game piece and making a few dynamic sketches of it. In week 2, we began to actually discuss a bit about what sculpture was from a physical standpoint, during which we cut out our sketches to make paper mock-ups or maquettes of our sculpture to get a feel of how a sculpture takes up physical space. We also began to discuss how different materials can represent different things within the sculpture. For example, a sculpture made from wood could be representative of nature within the sculpture's narrative, if it has one, or one made of marble can mean posh but classical, representative of the classical marble sculptures of the Greeks and Romans that have now become synonymous with the idea of class. We were then instructed to make maquettes of our game pieces, using a material, or something that mimicked said material, to reflect the material of the game piece we had chosen, and to think about what that piece could symbolize using said materials. That is a lot of S's, I apologize. In my case, my chess piece happened carved of dyed blue alabaster stone, meant to mimic a turquoise stone in the way it was patterned. To mimic this, I had a mock-up of the game piece using tinfoil and paint. I also realized at this point that my Mancala turtle really didn't need to exist, but I still made him out of clay because he was cute. I noted that the turquoise patterning, as well as the chess piece's design, was very reminiscent of American Southwest style, with the turquoise in the way it was carved, similar to the geometrical art style of the area. In week 3, we began to further explore the ideas of material by finding meanings similar to the meanings of the material already used in our game piece, which could be as interpretive as we wanted, so long as we were able to back up our claim of why the material represented something. It could even be a personal representation instead of a broad one. For example, maybe fur, in the broad sense of interpretation, can mean warmth, life, and animals. But to someone else, due to their own personal experiences, maybe with the fur industry, fur can mean pain, abuse, and death. In my exploration of material, I decided that since turquoise is a stone from the earth, I would use other materials from the earth to reflect the area that turquoise comes from, namely a sandy-colored balsa wood, which I argued fit thematically due to its bright desert-colored grain, and silver jeweler's wire, which was often seen alongside turquoise stones in traditional jewelry making of southwestern Native American tribes. The end result, I ended up losing. I have pictures of it, but sadly I don't have the final piece. In week 4, we were introduced to the concept of plinths, which is the thing your sculpture is usually displayed on. This wasn't actually something I had thought about before, but having a plinth can give your sculpture a new meaning, depending on what the plinth is made of, where it's located, and how the sculpture interacts with it. If your sculpture was sitting on a plain white box in the middle of a gallery, the general idea there would be that the box was just a way to make it easier for gallery attendees to observe. But if your sculpture's plinth is knocked over and the sculptor is standing over it, that might mean that what you're trying to communicate is that your sculpture has a sense of power over the plinth. Maybe you're breaking down a metaphorical structure or form of order. Why should a sculpture be on a plinth? Or maybe your sculpture is haunted and got sick of sitting on a box all day. I used my cat as a plinth because he was cute and matched the color of the balsa wood and was born in the American Southwest. I used the argument of how cats are fickle creatures, and by using a living animal as a plinth, I was experimenting with the idea of impermanence, that if he moved, the sculpture would fall over. But really it was because he was cute! From there, my notes got horribly sloppy, and I did not label what week was what anymore. Do not do this. However, from the plinth, we moved on to experimenting with spatial awareness, creating molds of our current sculptures showing a positive and negative space, or an outward-facing space and an inward-facing space. You can see a positive and negative in a spoon. The head of the spoon has a positive space, which is the outward arch or bowl shape, and a negative space, which is the nothing that inhabits the inside of that arch. I made 3 of these positive and negative molds, 1 of tinfoil and 2 of clay that I pressed into the sculpture. From here on, things get a little abstract. Here's the bit that normally confuses people looking into the art world, and I'll admit it can get very weird. Deconstruction. In an incredibly literal form, deconstruction is to break something down. But in the terms of the art world, it can mean making something mean what it isn't. Let me explain. Going back to the material of marble, the images usually conjured up in one's mind tend to lean towards a sense of wealth, class, purity, and beauty, particularly when imagining the classical era sculptures of marble depicting heroic figures or biblical imagery. Now, an example of a deconstruction of those ideas is to make a sculpture using marble that is the opposite of those ideas. Let's say a turd, for argument's sake. A turd usually conjures up imagery of disgust, feelings of uncleanliness, flies, and decomposition. Now, a beautifully carved marble sculpture of a turd. What sort of imagery or feelings do you get from that now? Irony, perhaps. Maybe you were trying to be funny. Or maybe you were making a statement of the excessiveness of the 1%. How someone so wealthy wouldn't bat an eye at commissioning a turd to be carved out of a precious marble. Because they can. Quite often in the fine art world, irony like this is done to death. It's practically the language of contemporary artists, to be ironic, in both a dead serious but also a funny way. I made my next experimental sculpture an ironic deconstruction by making what's supposed to be a solid 3-dimensional game piece that moves across the board out of a floppy piece of fabric, so now it can't stand on its own or be identified as a game piece anymore, so it's useless. Irony! Whew, that was a tangent. And finally, we were to use all of our knowledge that we had learned to make a prototype sculpture of our game piece before starting on our final. After a few initial sketches of my other works, I narrowed down what I thought would work best for my game piece. I wanted to focus more on the meaning behind structure and shape, rather than the physical material itself, as I was limited on my choice of materials simply due to budget constraints. So I decided on making a king chess piece that was a deconstruction of itself. Instead of being small, it would be large. Instead of being able to move in any direction on the board, but only 1 square at a time, it would completely encompass the board and be unable to move. And instead of being protected by all the other pieces, it would have arms that embraced the pieces, protecting them instead. I still kept a few of the key features of the original chess piece, so that my new piece would be recognizable, but now the meaning and use of the piece itself was completely the opposite. I was actually rather proud of this piece. I'm not normally a sculptor, and this was my first time doing an actual proper clay sculpture, and overall I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. After we had finished making our sculptures, however, we were to start working on our final project for the year, which I will cover in the next video so I don't overwork myself on this one in post. That was part 1 of my contemporary sculpture workbook tour. I hope you enjoyed learning a bit about what it is I've learned, and I look forward to making the next video in which I show how I apply all of that into my creative processes. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, please leave them in the comment box below and I will do my best to respond to them. I have been Salt, and I hope you have a good day.